White judge finds black woman, freezes when he learns she's a federal prosecutor. That'll be a $500 fine for contempt of court, Judge Raymond Doyle declared, his gavel striking the bench with a sharp crack. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. All eyes turned to the black woman standing confidently at the front, her face calm but her jaw clenched. She hadn't even spoken yet. Jasmine Carter didn't flinch. She looked straight ahead, lips pressed into a line, hands folded in front of her. She had walked into the courtroom 15 minutes late, and that alone had triggered the judge's fury. Never mind that the last man who came in late, a white man in khakis and a golf shirt, had received only a raised eyebrow. Judge Doyle leaned forward slightly, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose. This court takes punctuality very seriously, Miss Carter. Your tardiness is a disruption, and we will not tolerate disruptions. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. Her eyes swept the room, noting the gallery filled with minor case defendants, traffic violations mostly, and a few local attorneys, all watching. "Do you have something to say for yourself?" Doyle asked, eyebrows raised. She did, but not yet. Not like this. "No, Your Honor," she replied evenly. Her voice, low and controlled, carried easily across the room. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a choice. Doyle gave a curt nod. "Good. Then let this be a lesson in accountability." He moved on to the next case, seemingly satisfied, but Jasmine Carter was just getting started. Earlier that morning, her day had begun with purpose. She had set out from her townhouse in southeast D.C., wearing a pressed navy blazer, slacks, and low heels. She looked like any other professional in the city. But unlike most, she held one of the most powerful positions in the U.S. legal system, Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, Federal Prosecutor, veteran of 24 major trials, holder of a Harvard law degree, and someone with more courtroom hours than most judges twice her age. But none of that mattered here. Not in this municipal court, not to this judge. She wasn't here for a federal case today. She was here for a personal matter. A ridiculous parking ticket issued in a clearly unmarked loading zone. She had photos, timestamps, and a witness statement from a shop owner. This should have been routine. Quick in, quick out. Except she'd been delayed. At 8:10 a.m., she had received a call from her office. A key witness in an active federal investigation was panicking. Jasmine had no choice. She talked him down, took notes, forwarded documents, and then bolted across town to appear in court. When she arrived at 9:15 for her 9 a.m. hearing, she had expected some pushback, maybe a warning. She had not expected a $500 fine, not without so much as a hearing. When her case was finally called, she stepped forward again, her documents neatly organized in a slim black folder. "Miss Carter," Doyle said, not bothering to hide his disdain. "You may proceed." Jasmine opened her folder calmly. "Yes, Your Honor. I have documentation here that shows the parking zone in question was not marked at the time of citation. I also have photos taken within 10 minutes of the ticket being issued, as well as a signed statement from a local business owner." Doyle didn't even look at the documents. "That may be," he said dismissively, "but this court doesn't look kindly on excuses, especially not from people who walk in late expecting leniency." Jasmine felt the shift then, the unspoken accusation beneath his tone. She could hear the soft murmurs in the courtroom, the quiet tension. "Your Honor," she said, voice still measured, "if I may clarify the reason for my tardiness." Doyle held up a hand. "It won't matter. The fine stands. This is a courtroom, Miss Carter, not a coffee shop." Jasmine let that hang in the air for a moment. Then, quietly, deliberately, she reached into her briefcase. She pulled out a small leather wallet, black with a gold seal. She flipped it open and held it up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice now louder, more pointed, For the record, I am Assistant United States Attorney Jasmine Carter. I was delayed this morning due to an emergency in an ongoing federal investigation. Gasps echoed. Someone in the gallery actually said, "Wait, what?" Judge Doyle froze. His fingers, which had been shuffling case files, suddenly stopped. His posture changed, and for the first time since Jasmine had entered the courtroom, he looked directly at her. Really looked. She met his eyes, calm but unyielding. "I did not announce my position earlier," she continued, her badge still held up, "because I came here today as a private citizen to resolve a personal citation. I had hoped I could be treated with the same respect as anyone else in this courtroom." The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. Judge Doyle swallowed. His voice, when he finally found it, was hoarse. "I was unaware of your position." Jasmine lowered her badge. "And that's precisely the problem, Your Honor." Gasps turned into whispers. Mrs. Levin, the court clerk, shot a wide-eyed look at the bailiff. The white woman who'd come in late earlier shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Jasmine continued, "You fined me $500 without even hearing my case. You dismissed my documentation without review. You refused to let me speak. And you did all of that based on what?" The judge said nothing. "I don't need this fine dismissed," she said. "I'm not here for favors. But I do believe this courtroom deserves a higher standard, one that doesn't shift based on what someone looks like or what assumptions you make when they walk through the door." The tension in the room was thick. No one moved. No one whispered. Jasmine looked around the room slowly, then back to the judge. "I'll pay the fine," she said, "but this won't be the end of it." Judge Doyle opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Outside the courtroom, a young public defender named Evan Chang stood against the wall, arms crossed, eyes wide. He had seen Judge Doyle berate black and brown defendants for years. But this was different. This was power pushing back. And it wasn't yelling. It was calm, documented, impeccable. Inside, Jasmine turned and walked back to her seat, and Judge Doyle, for the first time that morning, looked small in his own courtroom. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that single confrontation, was going to change everything. Judge Raymond Holt sat stiffly in his high-backed leather chair, reviewing the docket for the day, unaware that his courtroom was about to become the epicenter of a much larger storm. At 9 a.m. sharp, he began calling cases with his usual mechanical precision. The courtroom was mostly filled with traffic violators and small claims litigants, and he moved quickly through the list, barely glancing at the people before him. His philosophy was simple: discipline, order, and punctuality. In his mind, tardiness was a personal offense, especially when it came from people he considered less professional. At exactly 9:12 a.m., the courtroom doors creaked open. All heads turned. A tall, elegant black woman entered, dressed in a crisp navy suit with modest heels and a brown leather briefcase in hand. Her natural curls were pinned neatly, and her face carried the quiet focus of someone used to command. But Judge Holt saw something else, someone who was late. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know why she was there, didn't ask. "You there," he barked from the bench. "Step forward." The woman's name was Dana Whitaker, 36 years old, federal prosecutor for the Northern District of Illinois, top of her class at Northwestern Law. But Judge Holt saw none of that. He saw what he wanted to see. Dana approached the podium calmly. Her expression was polite but unreadable. "You must be Dana Whitaker," Judge Holt said, already checking her name off the docket. "Yes, Your Honor," Dana replied, her voice poised. "You were scheduled for 9 o'clock, not 9:13, he snapped, checking the courtroom clock like it was gospel. "Do you believe your time is more valuable than this court's?" Dana opened her mouth to explain, but he raised a hand to cut her off. "I don't need your excuse." I've heard them all. Traffic. Alarm didn't go off. Lost track of time. He leaned back with theatrical displeasure. This courtroom functions on respect and punctuality. You don't just stroll in late and expect to be treated the same. A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. An older white man sitting near the front, who had arrived 10 minutes late and received no comment from the judge, cleared his throat awkwardly. Dana's eyes flicked to him for just a second, then back to Holt. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began. "I said I don't need an explanation," Holt snapped again. "What I need is to make a point." He picked up his gavel and slammed it down. "You are hereby fined $500 for contempt of court, payable before you leave the courthouse today. Maybe next time you'll set 2 alarms. There was a long silence in the courtroom. Dana stood motionless at the podium, her jaw tight but her voice controlled. "Is there a reason, Your Honor, why this penalty is being applied selectively?" The judge's brow furrowed. "Excuse me? I've been observing the docket. I noticed a Mr. Schaefer was called at 9:08. He entered the courtroom at 9:11 and received no comment. Nor did Ms. Locke, who arrived just moments before I did." Judge Holt's lips pressed into a thin line. "I reserve the right to apply contempt charges based on my discretion." "Understood," Dana said and quietly pulled out her phone. "What do you think you're doing?" Holt barked. "Making a note, Your Honor." There was something about her tone that stopped him cold, not defiant, not sarcastic, but deeply controlled, measured. It was the tone of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms, not as a defendant, but on the other side. In the back corner, the courtroom bailiff, Officer Carla James, who had worked under Holt for 5 years, took a subtle breath. She had seen this before. The judge was quick to humiliate and slower to admit mistake, but something about Dana unnerved him. Dana continued calmly. "I'll comply with the fine, but I would like the opportunity to present the facts of my case now." Judge Holt, still irritated but wanting to move on, waved a hand. "Fine. Proceed." Dana opened her briefcase, removing a small folder. She presented photographs, timestamps, and witness statements regarding her parking ticket, issued at a location where 2 contradictory signs had been posted. The evidence was airtight. Her case should have been dismissed in minutes, but Holt barely looked at it. "You'll have to file a motion to appeal if you want the fine removed," he said dismissively. Dana nodded. "Noted." And then she slowly pulled a badge from her inner blazer pocket. She held it up so the courtroom could see it clearly. A federal badge from the Department of Justice, marked with her name and title, Assistant United States Attorney, Northern District of Illinois. The silence that followed was profound. Judge Holt froze. The people in the gallery looked back and forth between Dana and the bench. Some whispered. A few gasped. Holt's posture stiffened, his eyes locked on the badge as if it were radioactive. Dana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I believe it's important, Your Honor, for the court to know that I was late this morning due to an urgent conference call regarding a federal criminal case scheduled for trial this week. I'm lead prosecutor. My office has documentation confirming this, which I can provide." Judge Holt's throat bobbed. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Then finally, awkwardly, he said, "Had I known your background, perhaps I would have handled this differently." Dana raised an eyebrow. "That, Your Honor, is precisely the problem." The gavel on his bench remained untouched this time. From the back, Officer James muttered under her breath, "About damn time." Outside the courtroom, word spread quickly. A federal prosecutor being fined without cause, a judge caught in the act of his own bias. Inside, Dana remained calm, but inside her chest, her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with righteous fire. She had no intention of letting this incident be buried. Not this time. The courthouse lobby hummed with low conversation as Dana Whitaker stepped out into the corridor. The moment the heavy wooden doors to Judge Holt's courtroom closed behind her, she finally let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She stood still for a second, allowing the tension in her shoulders to drain, her pulse to slow. But she wasn't walking away from this. Not even close. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her paralegal, Justin. "He fined you $500. "Are you serious? We need to flag this. Want me to call HR or the press office?" Dana didn't reply right away. Instead, she walked calmly to a quiet corner of the courthouse, opened her leather folder, and began making notes. Times, quotes, names. The gavel might have fallen, but her real work was just beginning. Inside the courtroom, Judge Holt sat motionless for a few long moments. His fingers tapped against the oak of his bench. His courtroom, his sanctuary, had turned on him, and for the first time in decades, his authority had been checked. "Mr. Delgado, you're next," he finally called, trying to regain the rhythm of his docket. But the air had shifted. Everyone in the room could feel it. Eyes darted between the door Dana had exited through and the judge's face, which was paler than usual. Even the bailiff, Officer Carla James, held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary before calling the next case. Back in the hallway, Dana finally typed a response to Justin. "Don't contact the press." "Not yet. But I want every court transcript from Holt's courtroom over the past year. If there's a pattern here, and I suspect there is, we'll find it." A pattern. That's what she was looking for. This wasn't just about her. Dana had seen enough microaggressions in courtrooms over the years to know this wasn't an isolated incident. But today had pushed something inside her over the edge. It was the brazen confidence with which Holt had passed judgment on her. The arrogance. The assumption that she didn't belong. Justin hesitated. "You're being called confrontational, arrogant. One blog post said you weaponized your federal status to humiliate a respected judge." Dana's jaw clenched. "Of course. Some senior partners are calling it a liability. Others say it's long overdue." He paused. "You've touched a nerve." Dana leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "That's exactly what I intended." But before she could say more, her office phone rang. "Whitaker," she answered. "Dana," came the familiar voice of U.S. Attorney Charles Monroe. His tone was calm but formal, never a good sign. "I'd like to see you in my office. Now." She hung up and stood, smoothing her navy blazer. "Showtime," she muttered. Justin shot her a look. "Want me to come with?" Dana shook her head. "Not yet, but be ready." Monroe's office was on the top floor with a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. He was seated behind his desk, his tie already loosened, laptop open and a tablet glowing beside him. "Have a seat," he said without looking up. Dana sat silently, waiting. "You've stirred the pot," he said finally, eyes still scanning the tablet. "There are calls from the Bar Association, emails from judges, reporters requesting comments." "I didn't start this," Dana replied coolly, "but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen." Monroe finally looked up. "That's not what I'm asking. I know you, Dana. You've always been the calmest head in the courtroom. I just want to know, what's your plan?" Dana didn't hesitate. "To document everything, interview other victims, identify a pattern, and file a formal complaint against Judge Holt, not because of what happened to me, but because of what he's done to countless others." Monroe tapped his fingers on the desk. "You realize this could cost you." Dana raised her chin. "I've spent a decade working for justice. If I back down now, what does that say about everything I've fought for?" He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm not going to stop you, but I can't shield you from the blowback either. If you do this, it's on the record. You'll have enemies, and they'll be powerful. Dana stood. Let them come. Back downstairs, Dana returned to her office and immediately got to work. She called Gloria, the woman from the courthouse bench, and arranged to meet her later that afternoon for an affidavit. Then she emailed her contacts at the Georgia Legal Aid Society, asking if they had clients with complaints against Holt. By noon, she had 3 more. One was a 22-year-old student named Marcus, who had been fined $750 for contempt after asking for a clarification during his hearing. Another was a Spanish-speaking woman who had her interpreter dismissed by Holt and was penalized for delaying the court. The third was a veteran who was berated in open court for not standing fast enough, despite having a documented knee injury. The stories were different, but the tone was the same: demeaning, impatient, dismissive. Holt's pattern was becoming harder to ignore. That afternoon, Dana met with Gloria at a small cafe near Grady Park. She brought a laptop, a recorder, and her legal pad. Gloria brought copies of the paperwork from her son's case, and tears that she tried to hold back but couldn't. "He's been scared to go anywhere ever since," Gloria whispered. "Said the judge made him feel like a criminal, like he didn't matter." Dana reached across the table and placed her hand over Gloria's. "He does matter, and so do you. This isn't just going to disappear." That night, Dana stayed in her office long after dark. The only light came from her desk lamp and the glow of her laptop screen as she compiled every affidavit, every transcript, and every court record she could find. At 10:43 p.m., she sent the first draft of her report to Monroe with a simple subject line: "Preliminary findings, Judge Holt, bias inquiry." She attached documentation from 7 cases, each with names, dates, court transcripts, and observable disparities. And then she sat back in her chair, exhausted but resolute. She knew she was going to war, but it was a war worth fighting, because this time she wasn't just a federal prosecutor. She was the voice for those who'd never been heard. By the next morning, Dana Whitaker's name was trending nationwide. What began as a tense courtroom moment had evolved into a movement. The transcript from Judge Holt's hearing, leaked anonymously, had been verified and picked up by major outlets. CNN ran a segment titled "Federal Prosecutor Confronts Courtroom Bias." MSNBC followed with a roundtable on racial disparities in municipal courts, using Dana's story as a case study. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeWithWhitaker with Whitaker and #bias on the bench. But with visibility came backlash. By 8 a.m., Dana had already received 4 threatening voicemails, 2 thinly veiled warnings from senior judges, and 1 politely worded message from the Georgia Judicial Council requesting a respectful cooling-off period. She deleted the first 4. She ignored the next 2. And she forwarded the council's message to her assistant, adding a short note: "No cooling off. We just got started." Her office had become a command center. The wall behind her desk was now filled with sticky notes and case summaries. A dry erase board tracked recurring patterns across Holt's past 5 years: age, race, gender, fine amounts, courtroom behavior. It looked like the headquarters of a federal investigation, and in truth, it was starting to become one. Justin knocked and entered, holding a manila folder. "Got another one," he said. "Let me guess. Holt fined someone for breathing too loud?" "Not far off," he replied. "This one's brutal. A single mom, fined $500 for showing up in leggings instead of slacks. Holt called it disrespectful attire." Dana rubbed her temples. "Did we get a transcript?" "Working on it. But get this, she was coming straight from her shift at the hospital. She's a nurse, wasn't even supposed to be off." Dana exhaled sharply, a mix of anger and fatigue. And yet, he's still wearing the robe. Not for long, she hoped. She looked over the growing pile of affidavits on her desk. 23 and counting. That afternoon, she met with U.S. Attorney Charles Monroe again, this time in the conference room with two other DOJ investigators present. The atmosphere was tense but serious, like something out of a legal thriller. Dana presented her case point by point, meticulously, calmly, methodically. When she finished, Monroe leaned forward, fingers steepled. "I have to admit, Dana," he said, "this is more thorough than I expected." "I don't build anything halfway," she replied. "No, you don't. But this kind of effort, this isn't just about Holt anymore. You're circling a much bigger target." "I know." He tapped a pen against the table. "We're not just talking about one judge with a God complex. If your findings are accurate, and they look like they are, we're talking about institutional rot. A system that's been allowed to run unchecked for decades," Dana nodded. "Then it's time someone cleaned house." Monroe hesitated. "This will rattle people in power. There will be hearings, investigations, pushback from within our own circles. Some of these judges have been sitting on the bench longer than you've been out of law school." Dana's tone didn't flinch. "Then they've had plenty of time to learn the law they're now breaking." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her statement hanging between them. Finally, Monroe nodded. "We'll take it to the office of the Inspector General. You'll be the lead point of contact. But be smart, protect yourself, and for God's sake, get a security detail." She hesitated, then agreed. By the end of that week, Dana had given interviews to NPR and the New York Times. She wasn't chasing media, but she wasn't hiding either. She understood the value of narrative, the importance of controlling her own story before others twisted it. And twist it they tried. One Atlanta tabloid accused her of grandstanding for political gain. A conservative blog ran a hit piece headlined, "Prosecutor Uses Race Card to Smear Respected Judge." An anonymous email circulated among a few old guard federal attorneys suggesting Dana's militant tone was bad optics for the Justice Department. She printed that one and pinned it on her board, a reminder of why she kept going. That Sunday, she received an email that froze her in place. It was from an anonymous account. No subject line, no greeting, just a single sentence. "He knows who you really are now." Her heart raced. She didn't need a signature to know exactly who he was. Judge Holt. Until now, Dana had remained remarkably composed, but something about that line, so simple, so personal, rattled her. She forwarded it to Monroe and her security team. Then she went into her bedroom, locked the door, and allowed herself 5 minutes to cry. Not from fear, but from frustration, from exhaustion, from the endless burden of being a black woman navigating a system designed to doubt her. After 5 minutes, she wiped her face, pulled herself together, and went back to work. Because this wasn't over. In fact, the next move was hers, and it would shake the legal system to its core. Judge Holt wasn't sleeping. Since the courtroom confrontation with Dana Whitaker, the once confident magistrate had watched his reputation corrode like rust on a gavel. The headlines stung. The late-night phone calls from colleagues were worse. And now, there were whispers. Whispers of audits, whispers of ethics, complaints. Whispers of a young black woman in a navy blazer who'd walked into his courtroom and cracked open the facade he'd spent 30 years polishing. But Judge Holt wasn't just angry. He was scared. That morning, in his oak-paneled office above courtroom 2B, he sat alone, replaying the moment she had revealed herself. Not as some overreaching defendant, but as a federal prosecutor. The words had echoed in his mind for days. Assistant United States Attorney. She had said it so calmly, so deliberately. He hadn't seen it coming. And now the fallout was beginning to burn. The Judicial Conduct Committee had requested a statement. His longtime clerk, Martha, had suddenly gone on extended medical leave. 2 of his fellow judges had stopped returning his calls. Even worse, rumors were spreading that Dana Whitaker was building a full-blown investigation, not just against him, but against patterns across multiple municipal courts. Judges were nervous. And when judges got nervous, they turned on each other. Still, Holt wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. He began drafting a statement for the committee, trying to frame the fine he gave Dana as a procedural enforcement made without knowledge of her title or role. He emphasized the volume of cases, the need for courtroom efficiency, and how he applied rules uniformly to all. But as he typed, his hands trembled, because he knew it was a lie, and worse, he knew Dana could prove it. Meanwhile, across town, Dana met with her team in a private conference room at the Federal Building. There were now 24 open cases connected to Holt's courtroom. Some were minor, parking tickets, noise violations. Others involved harsh penalties for community service violations and missed court dates. But a new file sat at the center of the table now. This one wasn't about a fine or a dress code. It was about a wrongful incarceration. Tiana Bell, a 26-year-old nursing student, had spent 3 nights in jail after being found in contempt of court by Judge Holt. Her offense, speaking out of turn to explain her absence from a previous hearing. She had been recovering from surgery, with documentation. Holt refused to look at the paperwork. Her record now showed a contempt charge and a missed class that led to academic probation. She lost her scholarship, Dana said quietly, flipping through the file. Justin clenched his jaw. This is criminal. It is, Dana said, and it's going to stop. Later that afternoon, Dana returned to the courthouse, this time not as a defendant, not as an observer, but as a strategist. She entered through the side door, accompanied by DOJ investigator Leah Ortega and 2 members of the Office of Inspector General. Their presence was unannounced, their visit deliberate. They weren't there to make noise. They were there to listen. For the next 3 hours, Dana and her team interviewed court staff, anonymously, off the record, bailiffs, clerks, even a former intern who had left law entirely after witnessing what she described as routine disrespect and intimidation in Holt's courtroom. One former staffer spoke about how Holt would refer to black female defendants as mouthy or emotional, while white defendants who interrupted were described as passionate or assertive. Another revealed that Holt had once joked about giving higher fines to get these people to learn quicker. These people, Dana kept her face neutral, but inside something hardened. She was no longer simply exposing misconduct. She was documenting a culture of cruelty, and it was bigger than Holt. That night, after hours of testimony and evidence collection, Dana sat alone in her office, sipping cold coffee, staring at the timeline laid out across her whiteboard. She had names, fines, case numbers, audio transcripts, and a growing coalition of allies inside the justice system who were fed up with quietly watching it rot. Her phone buzzed, a message from a name she didn't expect. Judge Renee Booker, one of the most respected black female judges in Georgia. Dana had clerked under her years ago. The text was brief. Call me. We need to talk. You're shaking the tree and the right people are watching. Dana took a deep breath and called. Booker answered on the first ring. I'm proud of you, she said immediately, but you're not just upending a court. You're stepping into a fight with the whole judicial machine. Be ready. I am, Dana replied, but I need support from inside the bench. Quietly or not. There was a pause. You'll have it. But you need to know, Holt isn't alone. And he's not going down without pulling others with him. Dana's eyes narrowed. Then they better be ready. The next day, Dana's team submitted their first formal complaint to the Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission. Accompanying it were 33 affidavits, audio evidence from courtroom recordings, and 3 sworn testimonies from Holt's former staff. The request, A full ethics investigation, immediate suspension pending review, and public release of findings. That same day, Holt received an official notice from the commission. He read it in silence, his hands shaking. He picked up the phone and dialed an old contact, a defense attorney he hadn't spoken to in years. "I need advice," he said, his voice tight. The voice on the other end hesitated. "You looking for legal counsel?" "I might be," Holt admitted. Because finally, after decades of wielding unchecked power, Judge Holt realized what it felt like to be on the other end of a courtroom judgment. And this time, he wasn't holding the gavel. By the end of the week, the walls of Judge Holt's courtroom weren't just closing in. They were shaking. And he could feel it. Word had spread beyond the municipal courthouse. The Judicial Qualifications Commission had fast-tracked the ethics complaint, citing compelling preliminary evidence and public interest. The governor's office had been briefed. Civil rights organizations were holding press conferences on the courthouse steps. Holt's once ironclad grip on his courtroom had turned slippery overnight. But the worst blow came in the form of a subpoena, not just for Holt's records, for him. He was to appear before the commission for a formal disciplinary hearing, public, under oath, and with all past judicial conduct on the table. And it wasn't just about Dana anymore. At the same time, Dana sat across from a panel of DOJ officials, presenting a full report compiled over 2 weeks of investigation. The data was damning. Statistical disparities in fines, contempt charges, and case dismissals, all with clear patterns showing bias along racial lines. "I want the commission to act," Dana said firmly. "But even if they don't, we will." The room was silent for a moment. Then a senior DOJ official, a weathered man with a steel-gray beard, leaned forward. "This goes deeper than just Holt," he said. "What you've uncovered could serve as the model for reform across multiple jurisdictions." Dana didn't blink. "Then let's make sure it does." The day of the disciplinary hearing arrived. It was held in a tall, neutral building downtown, away from the courthouse Holt once ruled. A long mahogany table stretched through the center of the room. Microphones lined its surface. At one end sat the commission, 3 judges, 2 attorneys, and 1 public representative. Donna entered the room with quiet confidence, her legal pad in hand, surrounded by 2 investigators and her longtime colleague, Justin. Holt was already seated at the table. He looked smaller than usual. Gone was the stiff black robe. In its place was a dark gray suit that couldn't hide the sweat beading on his forehead. He tried not to look at Dana, but the moment their eyes met, he flinched. The chairwoman of the commission opened the proceedings. "This hearing concerns allegations of racial bias, disproportionate sentencing, and misconduct related to Judge Henry Holt's conduct on the bench. We will hear testimony, review evidence, and determine whether disciplinary action is warranted." Dana was the first to speak. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She walked the commission through Holt's courtroom behavior step by step, showing case files, transcripts, and even a timeline of fines imposed over a 6-month period. She highlighted inconsistencies, quoted directly from Holt's own rulings, and presented video footage that showed him reprimanding black defendants for behavior he ignored in white ones. Then came the moment that turned the tide. Dana played a 2-minute clip from the court security video. It showed Holt fining her $500 for being disrespectful and late. Then moments later, calmly greeting a white male attorney who arrived 12 minutes after her, without a single comment. The contrast was stark, unignorable. Holt shifted in his seat, but Dana wasn't done. She turned to the panel. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about every person who walked into that courtroom expecting justice, and instead found judgment, not based on their actions, but on their identity." The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Dana sat down. Holt's attorney rose slowly, trying to redirect the narrative. He painted Holt as overworked, misunderstood, and committed to order. But his voice lacked conviction. The panel didn't look convinced either, and when they asked Holt to respond directly, his voice cracked. I never meant to discriminate," he muttered. "I didn't realize. I thought I was being fair." Dana didn't look away because she wasn't interested in his guilt. She was interested in the impact. Outside the hearing room, a crowd of reporters waited. By the time Dana stepped out, her name was already trending on social media, not as a prosecutor, but as a force, and people were watching. Young law students, former defendants, civil rights activists, mothers, clerks, public defenders, even judges. Some reached out quietly, others publicly. They all had one thing in common. They'd seen bias, and for the first time they believed something could be done about it. The commission recessed that evening to deliberate. Dana didn't wait for the results. Instead, she drove to a nearby community center where a town hall on legal reform was being held. She'd agreed to speak weeks ago. She arrived late, still in her courtroom clothes, but the moment she stepped inside, the room erupted into applause. She wasn't expecting it. She didn't smile, she just walked to the microphone. "I didn't start this because I wanted to take down a judge," she began. "I started this because I walked into a courtroom and realized even now, even in 2025, a black woman standing at a podium can still be dismissed, disrespected, and diminished. And I refuse to let that be the end of the story." The room fell silent again, hanging on her every word. "So we're going to keep going. Because this isn't just about a gavel, it's about the system, and we're going to change it." The crowd rose to its feet, not for a verdict, but for a beginning. Because in a world where justice is too often selective, Dana Whitaker had become something more than a federal prosecutor. She had become a symbol of resistance, of reckoning, of a system being forced to look itself in the mirror and answer. The morning of the verdict, Atlanta was quiet, but not still. Local news vans had already lined the block outside the State Disciplinary Commission headquarters. Inside, rows of seats were filled with attorneys, law students, court officers, and community members. Some had come out of solidarity, some had come out of curiosity. All had come because they knew this wasn't just about Judge Henry Holt anymore. It was about every judge who'd silenced a voice with a gavel. Every courtroom where justice came with a side of bias. Every person who had ever been made to feel small in a system meant to protect them. At 9:03 a.m., Dana Whitaker stepped through the glass doors. Her face was calm, her posture steady. Dressed in a deep navy suit with sharp lapels, she carried only a notepad in her hand. No briefcase, no legal team behind her. Just purpose. "Ms. Whitaker," one reporter called, "do you expect a full suspension?" She didn't break stride. "I expect accountability," she said simply. Inside the chamber, the air was tight. No one made a sound as the chairwoman of the commission took her seat at the center of the panel. After thorough review of testimony, evidence, and judicial conduct records, she began, her voice carrying the weight of finality. "The commission has reached a unanimous decision regarding Judge Henry Holt." Judge Holt sat at the long table, his face pale. His hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The chairwoman looked directly at him. "You have been found in violation of multiple ethical standards, including repeated biased treatment of defendants based on race, improper courtroom conduct, and misuse of contempt powers. Effective immediately, you are suspended from the bench without pay, pending permanent removal proceedings." Gasps echoed across the room. Even Holt seemed to stop breathing for a moment. But the chairwoman wasn't finished. In addition, a full review of your past 5 years of rulings will be undertaken by an independent judicial review team, with oversight from the Department of Justice. She paused. And you are ordered to attend mandatory anti-bias training should you wish to reapply for any judicial position in the future. It was the kind of professional death sentence few ever received in public. The room didn't cheer. It absorbed. Because real justice doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like release. Later that day, Dana sat in her office, the city skyline sprawling behind her. She was still processing. The ruling was a victory, yes, but a weight remained. Justin knocked lightly and stepped inside. He was holding a folder labeled Judicial Disparities, Fulton County. They want us to expand the program, he said. Statewide, maybe beyond. Dana nodded, flipping through the documents. Let's do it. But not through press conferences, through policy. She pulled a printed quote from her desk drawer. It was something her mother had framed years ago. Justice is not about punishing the powerful. It's about empowering the forgotten. She pinned it back on the wall. That's our North Star, she said quietly. Weeks later, a new program launched, the Equal Bench Initiative. Its mission, to track, audit, and reform courtroom behavior through real-time data, public accountability, and mandatory bias assessments for all judges statewide. Donna was named as its founding director, and just like that, her role shifted from prosecutor of cases to architect of change. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, Dana walked into a community center where dozens of students had gathered for a mock trial competition. She wasn't there to lecture. She was there to watch. One of the students, a 17-year-old black girl named Tamia, stood confidently at the podium, cross-examining a mock witness. Her questions were precise, her tone respectful but sharp. She stood tall, commanding the room in a way Dana immediately recognized. After the session, Tamia approached her. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, eyes wide with admiration, "I read everything about your case. You're the reason I want to go to law school." Dana smiled, not the polite, professional kind, a real one. "And you're the reason I kept going." Months later, as part of her new role, Dana stood before a packed auditorium of judges, prosecutors, and policymakers in Washington, D.C. She'd been invited to deliver the keynote address on judicial reform. She stepped to the podium, looked out at a sea of black robes and navy suits, and spoke. "I didn't start this journey to be a symbol. I started it because I was tired of watching people be reduced to checkboxes and case files, tired of the excuses, tired of the silence. I believed then, as I do now, that power does not make you immune from accountability, and that justice is not a privilege, it is a right." Her voice didn't rise, but her words landed like a gavel. "We are the system now, and we will no longer pretend not to see what we all know is broken. It is time to rebuild, from the inside out." The crowd stood, not for applause, but for commitment. That evening, Dana sat alone in her apartment. The city buzzed below, and her phone lit up with messages from journalists, activists, and government officials. But one text stood out. From her mother. "I always knew you'd change things. I'm proud of you, baby. But remember, you didn't do it alone. And you're not done yet." Dana looked out her window at the courthouse down the block. Where she once stood accused, where she now stood remembered, where tomorrow's battles would begin. Because in a world where injustice wears many robes, the real fight is in what happens after the gavel falls. And Dana Whitaker wasn't going anywhere. If this story moved you, made you think, or lit a fire in your heart, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story that shines a light on truth, justice, and the voices that deserve to be heard. Like, share, and comment below, because your engagement helps us reach even more people who need these messages. We're building a community that believes in fairness, equality, and standing up when it matters most. Thank you for watching and for being part of the change.